These unconventional times require unconventional conversations. Listen in as your host, Richard Gordon, engages in one-on-one conversations with numerous leaders, elected officials, politicians, and others to learn what's happening in your state, on the Hill, and across America. Now, here's the host of Unconventional Times, Richard Gordon.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is Unconventional Times, and I'm Richard Gordon, your host. There are many ways that someone could serve. There's many ways that they could be involved in public service. For a lot of people, it's being in an elective life. For some people, it's serving in the military. For others, it's being a first responder, a teacher. There are many ways to do it. Our guest today has served the public in so many different ways. In fact, his whole career has been about public service. Since I've known our guest, David Cicilline, which goes back many, many years, we've been good friends a long time, he has always been in public life in one way or another. He was the 36th Mayor of Providence, Rhode Island. He served from 2003 to 2011. He was elected to the United States Congress, where he served for 7 terms from 2011 to 2023. And now he is the president of the Rhode Island Foundation, which is the largest and most comprehensive funder for not-for-profits in the state of Rhode Island. This is someone who has dedicated his life to public service. I'm just honored he's my friend, and I'm honored that he's here on our show. David Cicilline, welcome to Unconventional Times.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you.
It's always a delight to see you. Hey, look, I want to start in the very beginning of your life, if you don't mind. You come from a large family in Rhode Island, 5 kids, there were 7 of you. Ever since I have known you, which, as I said, goes back many years, you always refer to yourself as a Jewish Italian gay guy from Rhode Island. That's you. Talk to me about your childhood. Talk to me about growing up in a large, very active family like that.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a very large family, as you mentioned. My parents married when my mother was 16 and my father was 18. They eloped.
Did they have to get? Is that
No,
legal
they
in Rhode
eloped.
Island?
Yeah, they got married in New York. My mother's Jewish, my father's Roman Catholic. So, this was a long time ago. So it was really frowned upon. Both
Sure.
my Jewish grandparents and my Italian Catholic grandparents were not happy. But they quickly got over it. And interestingly enough, my grandparents became great, wonderful friends. Both sides, they
Nice.
traveled together. They became really wonderful friends. But, I always describe my parents kind of growing up with us because they were really young. And my mother had my brother, just a year and a half after their marriage. And had one child after another, 5 kids in a row. So, my father put himself through law school while he was in his early years of marriage. So, but, really a family where my parents, I just remember as a kid, our house was welcoming to people from all over, all kinds of people of every ethnic, religious background, LGBTQ. It was just like, it was very much a part of our lives. And so I think the greatest gift my parents gave me was an understanding that every single person deserves respect and everyone has value. And just to have grown up with, parents that really instilled that in me was such a valuable lesson on all of us. But it was a great, wonderful childhood. I was on the beach last summer with my siblings, and I remarked, we are sitting in the same spot on the Narragansett Town Beach that we've gone to for 50 years.
Oh, is that where you were, Narragansett Town Beach?
Yeah, it's like our happy place.
That's fun. So tell me how, I wasn't kidding in the beginning. Your life is a story of public service. I mean, David, you've been doing this a long time, and you could have been a very successful lawyer like your dad was. You could have gone that route, but you chose to go this route, to go into public service. What was it about your childhood? What was it about growing up in this family that has led you to take this route?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that always kind of motivated me was the tremendous imbalance of power that I saw in so many circumstances. I remember as a young person, I mean, this was not normal activity, but I used to go to the town council and school committee meetings in Narragansett when I was 14 and 15. I wasn't old enough to drive, so my mother would have to drop me off and they would have this open mic where you could speak, but they moved it to the end of the meeting because they were sick of me talking.
Uh-huh.
So sometimes meeting wouldn't end till midnight, but my mother would pick me up. But we were fighting for things, and I would just remember being in those meetings and being like, I want to be in the position to actually get to make the decisions, because it just felt. And then when I became a lawyer, I did a lot of civil rights work and did mostly police brutality cases, and I was just enraged at the way people who had been victimized by the police were treated by the system, and by these hearings that the police department held where the judge was another police officer, and just all of it, it really like got to me. And I soon realized that politics was really the best place where I could make a difference. I was a public defender in DC, and I was working in the juvenile division with young kids, and I for the first time saw kids that were born into the worst poverty I'd ever seen in my life in the nation's capital. And I was trying to get them back into school and get them a summer job, and then I realized, like, if I was going to have a bigger impact, it was to try to prevent kids from being born into these circumstances to start with. So I came back to Rhode Island, and I always knew, running for office was something I wanted to do since I was very young. I always thought it was the place where I could have the biggest impact and make the biggest difference. And I still think that's the case, that government remains the place, when it's done properly, that you can have the biggest impact on people's lives. And so I ran for the state Senate. I got clobbered. It was the only race I ever lost, but beaten badly, which is very humbling. And then I ran for the House, the state legislature 2 years later, and won, and served 8 years in the House. Then ran for mayor because I really, there was a mayor in office at that time who was very corrupt, and everyone was complaining about him, but nobody was doing anything about it. So I thought, well, I'll run against him. Like, that's what you have to do. So I did that, and served 2 terms in the mayor's office for 8 years, and then ran for Congress when Patrick Kennedy retired. But I've always loved serving in public office. I've always understood I had a skill set that I thought was matched for that I could do something to improve people's lives, and it has been really satisfying. And I hope people feel like I've served them well in those offices.
Do you feel that your philosophy has been molded by what you learned first at home, and then as a public defender, and then working with children, all these other things you've done? Has that molded like the philosophy that you brought to government?
Yes. I think one of the things that I particularly learned as a public defender in DC was, and I used to always say this when I was, representing people, is like, most kids, because I was in the juvenile division, most kids who come from families where they have 2 parents that love them, have good nutrition, have a great supportive family, just wake up one day and say, I think I'll be a drug dealer. I think I'll go rob a bank. Like, there's always a story.
It doesn't happen that way.
It doesn't happen that way.
Yeah.
Always a story of complete deprivation, of neglect, of all kinds of trauma. And so I used to just ask the judges, understand that kids are in your courtroom not because they woke up one day and just made a bad decision, but there's a lot of other things that have contributed to their lives. And I just always wanted to sort of bring some of that understanding. And the guy still understood there was a punishment that had to be imposed. There was action that the state had to take, but it ought to be tempered by some understanding of how they got to be in that place. And then I thought, oh, politics is a place where you can have an impact to try to set different conditions so less young people come into the world with those circumstances. And kind of that's what drew me to come back to Rhode Island and say, like, in the court system, it's where all the failures of society have come to be kind of reckoned with. And if we could prevent some of those conditions, we'd prevent young people from going in the juvenile justice system.
I just realized as we're talking, I actually have over here on my bookcase a Providence, Rhode Island medal that the mayor gave me many years ago.
David, that's, historic.
It's historic.
I have no authority to give out those anymore.
It's on my bookcase. Besides Mayor Chancey's issues, what caused you to run for mayor? What did you want to accomplish? What did you think the issues were, and what did you think you could do about it?
Yeah, I mean,
you were a young guy, right?
I was very young. And when I started running against him, people said, you're crazy. Nobody could ever beat this guy. But I was really convinced that, the residents of Providence were really being disserved by the corruption, because businesses wouldn't come to Providence. It was hard for people to bring investment to the city. It was difficult for jobs to be created because people didn't have confidence that they were dealing with a city government that was, going to be honest with them. And it was really hurting the city. I mean, Boston just nearby was flourishing. There were great things happening. And we were really hurting because of the failure to give confidence that Providence was a good place to do business and it had an honest city government. And I thought, everyone was complaining about it, but nobody was doing anything about it. I thought, well, someone has to run. And I ran, on kind of a very basic set of issues, saying bringing, safety to the neighborhoods of the city, restoring ethical, honest government, helping to grow business, improving the quality of education in our city, and being committed to bringing the most talented, skilled experts into my administration, high quality people. And, when I started to run, it was just me and Cianci for a few months. And then he was convicted in federal court of corruption. And the day he announced he would not run for reelection, 21 people entered the mayor's race.
Oh my God.
But it was, I had been running for 3 months and I said, like, look, these folks see a political opportunity. I was the one who was saying we needed new leadership in the city. And,
Right.
nobody was able to catch up. And I ultimately won that primary. It ended up being a four-way primary and I got, I think, 54% of the vote. So I won the primary and then went on to win the mayor's office. But it was a very unlikely success because, it was this very cool coalition between the south side of the city, predominantly Latino, Dominican, and other Latino communities, and the east side of Providence, where I'd been state representative. And it was a really interesting coalition. And the two, I needed both to kind of overcome the rest of the city. And that's ultimately what we did. And of course, I was running as the first openly gay candidate, which, back then, well, it was a thing.
Something.
Not such a thing anymore, but it was interesting.
Which is a good thing. It's not a thing
No, it's a great thing, and now it's like,
is.
who cares? But yeah, back then it was quite a thing to overcome. And
Well, as I recall, you were the first gay mayor of a capital city.
Yeah.
There you go. I thought I got it. Cities, especially in the Northeast, have struggled for a long time with economic development, their base and whatnot, people moving out, et cetera. How do cities like Providence move forward? How do they restore that economic growth that you work so hard to put it on the right track? How do they keep that going?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. I think this is actually a moment for mid-sized cities like Providence. I think people are interested in being in places where they feel like they're in a city and they get all the dynamism of a city and the arts and cultural opportunities of a city and the restaurants and all the kind of cool stuff that cities have, but they also want to feel like they're part of a community, that they're connected. And so I think this is a moment for places like Providence where you get both of those things. I think one of the things we learned when I was mayor is that, public safety is really important. People need to not only live in a safe city, they have to feel safe. I'm really proud of the leadership that I brought in Dean Esserman, who was a really innovative police chief and really transformed the Providence Police Department and produced the lowest crime rate in 50 years. So it was a very safe city, remains a very safe city. But I think one of the other things that is really important is, and this is what distinguishes good cities from great cities, and that's a rich and authentic arts and cultural community. People want to be in a place where they can go to a concert in a park, where they can go to a theater, like all those cultural experiences that bring people together. And, Rhode Island and in Providence in particular is incredibly diverse. We have these great ethnic festivals. And so, Providence has really understood that that's one of the great strengths of this place. And then the last thing, which is a harder one, we're still working on it, is great transportation systems. This next generation of young people, they want to live in places where they don't have to own a car, where they can get around easily on public transportation. And so good, robust public transit, I think, is another critical ingredient to success.
Which is hard financially. And I'm going to add, just because he's a friend of mine, good leadership, like the current mayor, Brett Smiley. So I'll just throw that in because he's a friend of ours.
I think I think mayors make such a difference in cities.
They really do.
Mayors have to be innovative and have to be attentive to the community and the city they represent. And they have to be the chief economic development leaders of their cities and making certain that people understand that they have a city government that's ethical and that's honest and that is competent is, key to business development. And we have that in Providence, of course.
Let me move along with your career. So then you run for Congress. And I remember we talked about it at the time when you told me that you were running. What is it like? I mean, you just called yourself the CDO, the Chief Development Officer, but you also were the CEO. You ran Providence. You were in charge of it. What is it like being one of one to being one of 435.
Yeah. We used to had a former mayor's caucus in Congress where we lamented, remember when we had real power, And in Providence, as you know, it's a very strong mayor form of government. You are not
Sure.
only are in charge of and responsible for the police department and the fire department and the schools. I mean, you have a lot of authority on the city charter. And I remember kind of joking to my team in DC because I, of course, had a security detail as mayor of Providence and didn't drive for 8 years. And I get to Washington, I'm like, how am I getting to the office? And they're like, you're driving yourself. So you suddenly go from being a chief executive to a member of a legislative branch. So it was, I knew what I was getting into. There are trade-offs. Being mayor is great because, you see something you want it done, you can get it done, and you're in charge and you have the responsibility to execute and you have the power to execute. So that's great. One of the challenges when you don't have the resources to do things you want to do, that can be challenging. But there's no question about it. The Congress is different, but the joy of that is that the work you're doing takes longer and requires a lot more collaboration with others and convincing other people to agree with you. But the impact of that work, at least over time, is much bigger because it covers the whole country and it can have a real difference, across the board. So it's different. I mean, I loved both of those jobs very much. They were really different. One of the things I particularly loved in Congress was the deep, wonderful friendships you develop when you work in a legislative branch. It was the same feeling I had in the state legislature. When you're a mayor, it's more of a solitary job. You're sort of on your own, and it can be a lonely job. You have other mayor colleagues, but you're the decision maker and you're the chief executive. So, but the transition was fun. I had been mayor for 8 years. I was really excited about being in Congress because I thought I'll take all the frustrations I had as mayor and kind of concluding that the federal government didn't understand cities and what it took to make a city great and how they could be an effective partner with cities. And I'll take that to Washington and straighten out Congress. Of course, it never occurred to me when I got there that I would be in the minority and that
Right.
we would have no power to do anything, which was also a big transition.
I know you took Patrick Kennedy's seat, and the Kennedys, it seems, and you've had other relations with them. I know you went to college, I guess, with John Jr., John Kennedy Jr.
John was in my class at Brown. We started the College Democrats together.
What was he
Um,
like?
oh, he was great. And I remained very close with Joe Kennedy, who I served with in the House, who's
Right.
terrific. And Patrick was my predecessor and has been a great friend to me and came to campaign for me when I ran for Congress and remains a good friend today.
And is doing great things in mental
Yeah,
health
he's doing
and all
great.
the other things he's doing. It's just terrific. You touched a little bit about things you did in Congress. Greatest accomplishment. What do you look back and say, wow, I'm glad I did that?
Oh God, I would say one of the things I'm most proud of is the really serious antitrust investigation that I led along with Ken Buck of the
Well, you're the
large
chair of the subcommittee, right, at the
yes,
time? Yeah, I thought
the
so.
large tech companies. It was the first antitrust investigation done by Congress in 50 years.
Oh my.
That led to really important legislation and I think helped restart a antitrust movement in this country that continues today, which I'm really proud of. The two legislative accomplishments that I'm most proud of that were successful in the House but haven't passed the Senate yet were the assault weapons ban and the Equality Act. They remain in the hopper, and I hope I will one day get to come to Washington and watch a president sign both
Future
those.
president sign it. Well, you've been a leader your whole life on gun control. I mean, as mayor, you were a leader on that. In Congress, you were a leader on that. I mean, that has been something that the anti-crime stuff you did as mayor. I mean, this has been a theme for you.
Yeah, I think when you're the mayor of a city and you have the responsibility of either notifying or consoling a parent who has lost a child to gun violence
Mm.
or an adult who's lost a husband or a wife to gun violence, and to know the pain that gun violence causes in your community, and to know in particular the devastating consequences that come from assault weapons, which are designed to kill as many people as quickly as possible. They're designed as weapons of war. It's hard to not become a ferocious proponent of sensible gun safety legislation. And for me, it's one of the great tragedies that in the face of so much evidence of how dangerous these weapons are, that we still have not reenacted the assault weapons, which worked when we had it, and the American people overwhelmingly support an enactment of it, but the very powerful, very well-financed gun lobby continues to prevent passage of that. But as with the Equality Act, I have no doubt that we're going to have the Equality Act and we're going to have the Assault Weapons Ban in place one day in this country. It's just a matter of when, and hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later.
So you could go to the signing.
Exactly.
Talking about things that you were an early proponent on. I mean, you were stepping out on LGBTQ plus issues long before anyone did. I want to ask you not about why. I mean, I assume some of it was personal. Some of it just knowing you is a simple fairness issue, right? But also the political side of that, the side of, were you ever concerned? Because you were a proponent of this, oh my goodness, so much before anyone else was, pretty much. Were you concerned at the political downside of that and how people might react?
No, I mean, maybe this is because I come from a place, Rhode Island is, the voters in Rhode Island are just, these are wise people who have this deep sense of like right and wrong and fairness. And Rhode Island has a really important history in the foundation and formation of this country,
Sure.
in the development of the separation of church and state, and this,
Roger Williams, yeah.
yeah, and the Touro Synagogue and George Washington's visit to the Touro Synagogue about the importance of respecting religious diversity in this country. So for me, it got back to this whole idea of just fairness, of the idea of the government treating everyone fairly and protecting everyone's freedoms. And the Equality Act really came about because you might remember there was a piece of legislation that said you shouldn't be able to fire people because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, called ENDA. And I got elected to Congress and they were going to reintroduce ENDA. And I said, like, that's interesting, but like, that's one right to employment. What about all the other ones, like housing and public accommodations and all these other places where discrimination occurs? Why don't we create a comprehensive bill that says you can't discriminate against people in any of these areas? Like, take all the civil rights architecture and just add in sexualization or gender identity. And there was a little bit of a discussion in the LGBTQ plus community of like, should we do that? I said, look, we have to be the ones demanding that we are entitled to full equality, not just like equality on one issue, and then we'll come back in 5 years on another. And so it just seemed to me that the time had come for us to make the case that discrimination is wrong. Like, it's a fundamental American idea. Everyone knows discrimination is wrong. And if you frame it that way and say, this is about making sure people, all Americans, can live lives free of discrimination of any kind, that's like such an American idea. It's so fundamentally American. And that's why overwhelmingly there's support for the Equality Act in every single state in the country by a majority of the voters. It's supported by by a majority of members of Congress. The only place it seemed to face opposition was in the Republican members of the House and Senate, not reflecting the views of their constituents, because overwhelmingly the American people support full equality for the LGBTQ community and support protections against discrimination. So that's why I say there's no doubt it will become the law of the land. It's only a question of when.
When it happens. Sticking on that topic just for a minute, now that the Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade, are you concerned at all that Obergefell, the right to have same-sex marriages, have people marry whoever they want to marry? Are you concerned that this court or future courts might wipe out that right? And if it does, what happens?
Yeah. Oh, I think, yes, I am concerned. And I think all you have to do is read the decision in which the court said in the reversal of Roe versus Wade, Justice Thomas said, made reference like, oh, and by the way, we also should look at the decisions and cited Obergefell. So I think we all ought to be very concerned that the Supreme Court is willing to revisit this very basic notion of protections that have been long established by the Supreme Court, fundamental rights. And that's why we quickly passed legislation in the Congress to, well, not quickly, but we finally passed legislation in Congress to preserve same-sex marriage by statute. But yeah, there's a lot of reasons to be worried that the Supreme Court could take away other fundamental rights that we have today.
Let me turn to something more technical. You're a guy who was in Congress for a long time. A lot of budgets were passed while you were there. The American people do not understand why it's so complicated to get a budget and what this whole reconciliation thing is and why they care about it. So I'm not asking you the specifics of what's going on now, but I am interested in why is it so? I mean, you were a mayor. You had a budget. You had a budget every year. You got a budget through. What's the problem? What does this say about Congress?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the challenges is the budget process in the House requires a simple majority vote. The rules in the Senate require, because of the filibuster, that you get, 60 votes. So that means some, unless you have 60 of one party, some of the other party. So the system in the House allows a very kind of partisan budget product to be passed. And in the Senate, the rules require generally bipartisan support. So they both have a different set of rules. The one way around the bipartisan requirement of the Senate is this reconciliation process, which can only happen at certain times, but it will allow the Senate to behave like the House and pass a budget by a simple majority vote. So that's a real opportunity when you only have one party that has 53 or 54 votes, whatever it is. So that's why this is such a coveted moment, because this is the only way they can pass what is really a partisan piece of legislation and get it through the Senate, notwithstanding the Senate filibuster rule. So it unfortunately it produces little incentive to work together with members of the party on the other side, because they don't need the votes of the minority party. So they can do it without. So they've got to just manage the disagreements within their own caucus. But that's it. They don't ever have to talk to a Democrat. And in fact, there's some reporting now that they're doing the Senate version of this in Senator Thune's conference room. Obviously not with Democrats, but just like literally because they don't need the
They
Democrats
don't
on
need the votes.
the procedure. They don't need their votes.
How has Congress changed since you got there? It seems like the role of Congress as a third independent branch of government has somewhat changed. Have you felt that
Yeah, I
when
mean, I
you
think it changed from the time I first got there to the time that I left. I mean, I think I teach a course at Brown it's called Public Policy in Partisan Times, and we look at kind of what is the impact of partisanship and polarization. And one of the real consequences of it is, as Congress becomes more and more sort of gridlocked and less can get done, it has led to the significant rise of presidential power. And the public, in many ways, from Republican and Democratic presidents, has accepted that as the consequence of, like, Congress can't get anything done. So of course the executive branch has to do things that would otherwise be the proper purview of Congress. That's problematic whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Our founders had three branches of government, and the Congress's role was to really check the power of the executive. And so the kind of gridlock and inability to get anything done in Congress that has resulted in the presidential power being expanded is not good for democracy. It's just not, it's the kind of the House of Representatives is the closest to the people, where we're directly elected by our constituents. And that's not the case for the presidency. And it's also not the case for the Senate, because the Senate can be appointed when there are vacancies. In the House, you can only serve in the House of Representatives by direct election of the people. So we are the people's House. And when you reduce the power of the House, you're ultimately reducing the power of the members of our democracy, presidents. And I think the other thing which is more recent, this refusal, as the current president, the refusal of the Republicans in the House to really understand their role as a check on the executive branch, and to instead think that their role is to just advance the agenda of the president of their party. That can happen with both Republicans and Democrats, but it's really happening now. That's also not healthy. I mean, our framers had a very specific design for Congress. And when Congress isn't fulfilling that role, either because they don't want to or because the partisanship has become so polarizing that they can't get anything done, I think our democracy suffers as a consequence.
You talked about gridlock. Was that one of the reasons you left? Or, I mean, you got this amazing job, which we're going to talk about in 1 second.
Yeah,
Would you
no,
have left regardless?
no, I mean, I wasn't planning to leave. I was approached by the person who was doing the search for this position at the Rhode Island Foundation for the new CEO and president. And of course, I knew the Rhode Island Foundation because I'd worked with the Rhode Island Foundation in the state legislature as mayor, and certainly as a member of Congress. I knew the role it played in Rhode Island. And he basically, in a series of conversations, convinced me, he was very clever, he convinced me that, you got into public service because you wanted to have an impact on people's lives and make people's lives better here in Rhode Island. If I could convince you could get more done to improve the lives of Rhode Islanders at the Rhode Island Foundation than in Congress right now. And I think he was right. And so I really came to believe that in this role, I could have a bigger impact on the state that I loved and the communities that I care about back here in Rhode Island. And it's turned out to be completely true. So I wasn't planning to leave. The gridlock, the battling was not anything that was unfamiliar to me. That was a kind of brawler most of my life. And I enjoyed that part of the job. I also found, when people say, like, were you frustrated with the gridlock? I always found ways to get things done by finding Republicans to work with me. The example was the technology investigation. My colleague Ken Buck, he and I didn't agree on anything else. He was as conservative Republican as there was, but we worked so effectively because I found that issue. We worked really closely. He became a great friend. There was another congressman Republican from Michigan I worked on a gun bill. I used to just try to find who is the Republican that I can find that would work. And I'd realize you can't work with them on everything, but you'd find one issue that he or she really cared about and said, like, let's work on this together. And my experience was if you looked hard enough, you could find a colleague on the other side of the aisle to be your partner. And on every major bill I had in the House, I had a Republican co-lead with me. And it was hard work sometimes to find them and hard work to maintain the relationship. But gridlock is hard, but I think you can find ways to colleagues, at least while I was there. Maybe it's gotten worse, but for sure while I was there, I was able to do that.
So talk to me about the Rhode Island Foundation. Talk to me about what it does, what it's about, what it's for. You talked to me about why it's so compelling.
Yeah. So the Rhode Island Foundation is an amazing place. It's Rhode Island's only community foundation. It's the second oldest community foundation in America, 109 years old, second only to Cleveland. We are the largest funder of nonprofits, and the community foundations are places where people bring their resources, their generosity. We take those resources, we invest them in an endowment, and then we use a responsible portion of that endowment each year to invest in organizations that are doing work to advance the priorities of the Rhode Island Foundation. And last year, we gave grants of almost $90 million to thousands of organizations in our state. We have thousands of funds here at the Rhode Island Foundation. We have an endowment that is about $1.5 billion. Because of the generosity of Rhode Islanders for over 100 years, we have been able to have a real impact on many of the most important issues in our state. And the great thing about community foundations is they're funding organizations to do work today, but they're also a model that ensures that philanthropy continues in perpetuity. And so we can be a constant force for good, not only in our grant making, but in the civic leadership. We just led the campaign to pass the housing bond here in Rhode Island that produced $120 million for affordable housing. We're in the middle of a Blue Ribbon Commission that I co-chair with Dr. Nora Gordon from Georgetown to develop a new school funding formula for the state of Rhode Island that will deliver to the legislature at the end of the year. So it's not only this civic leadership, we convene, we bring people together to help solve big problems, but we also really mobilize the generosity of Rhode Islanders to help ensure it has the biggest impact possible to improve the lives of all Rhode Islanders. And so it's a great place. And I will tell you, every day I get to meet with organizations doing unbelievable work, working so hard to make Rhode Island better and to help Rhode Islanders. And I get the opportunity to meet with donors who are incredibly generous, who are saying, how can we contribute to making life better for other people? Sometimes people we don't even know. And that's a pretty great place to be.
That is great. You talked about housing a little bit, which is a major problem in the United States. What are you focusing on? Where do you think the organization is going over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? How do you lead it there? And what's the future?
So when I got here, I wanted to be sure that we developed sort of an action plan, not a strategic plan, but an action plan of what we were going to do for the time that I was here. And I didn't want it to be my idea or even the great team here. And we have great people at the Rhode Island Foundation. So we set about a very intentional process over 18 months to really make sure Rhode Islanders contributed to kind of what are the best opportunities in front of us and what are the greatest challenges Rhode Islanders face. What should we do as Rhode Island's Community Foundation to advance those priorities? And we had community dinners and we had focus groups, and we had online surveys, and we had polling. We really gave Rhode Islanders many different ways to contribute to this process. And at the end of it, we had over 2,000 Rhode Islanders who participated in this. We created a 5-year action plan that lists our 6 community priorities and how we're going to do our work. And now I'm out raising money to help advance this work. But it does really reflect what Rhode Islanders wanted us as Rhode Island's Community Foundation to focus on to improve life in our state. Housing is a big one. We're working on something called a Housing Accelerator Fund that is going to be a way to help those that are developing affordable housing and workforce housing to produce more of it, to provide some of those early costs that sometimes make it more challenging, but working very closely with our housing community development corporations to make sure we're doing all we can to increase the housing stock in our state. We're the lowest producer of housing in the country. We need to just produce more of it, every kind you can imagine, and the Rhode Island Foundation has been and will continue to be an important part of that work.
How is the foundation and the organizations that you support dealing with the massive funding cuts that are coming out of Washington? That's got to be a severe problem. And I noticed from reading your press releases and whatnot, it seems like you're being very active in trying to buck them up or give them the money that they're losing. How is that going to work? How's it sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, so we've been, hearing a lot from our grantees about either funding that has been cut, funding that has been suspended, programs that have been ended because of changes in federal policy, and how they're navigating that. So we immediately created what we call the CPR Fund, Community Partner Resilience Fund. And that was a fund to provide grants to community organizations that were adversely impacted by federal budget cuts. I asked my board to commit $500,000, $500,000 from our reserves, and then I raised another $800,000. So we had like a $1.2 million fund in a couple of weeks, and we began to do grant making from that. We also set aside $2 million of our grants, specifically targeting organizations that lost funding. We've invested a significant amount of resources to provide to the nonprofit Legal Protection Project, a group of lawyers that are helping nonprofits navigate this moment, providing legal counsel. We've supported that. And we're continuing to work with organizations with scenario planning and financial planning and development assistance. And we're going to have to do more because we're trying to do all we can to support organizations as they navigate this moment, recognizing we can never make up for everything they've lost. And our goal is to figure out how do we help them get through this moment and figure out how they manage their own organizations. Most importantly, so that the impact on Rhode Islanders is, not felt, and that we're protecting Rhode Islanders from the worst consequences of these budget cuts, knowing, we can't replace all the money, but we can help organizations be really strategic about it and help access legal resources and other expertise to help them get through this difficult time.
And some of these groups I noticed are like food pantries or people distributing vegetables or whatever. Let me, a couple very quick things. I know we're really out of time. I did notice on your website that you do still refer to diversity, equity, inclusion, and you include access. And that is still on your website. And we're at a time now where universities are stopping speaking like that, where companies are afraid to talk like that, but you're not. And I just wondered about that decision.
And it's hard to be a community foundation committed to serving everyone in your community and not recognizing that we want to make sure everything that we do here at the Rhode Island Foundation is inclusive and that it reaches every community and that everyone's voice is heard and that, we address persistent inequities that exist in our communities, whether it's in healthcare and education. If you look at the inequities in educational outcomes and economic outcomes and healthcare outcomes based on ethnic group and race and gender, like those are real. And so if you talk about creating a Rhode Island where everyone has access to high quality healthcare and everyone has access to a high quality education and everyone has real economic opportunity, you've got to address those inequities. So you can't really be a community foundation and not address that if you're true to those values. I'm fortunate, I think, that it's part of kind of who we are. And, sometimes you use different language because DEI seems to get people all right. But when you say to people, do you think we should try to reach everyone? Do you think everyone should be included? Do you think the answer is yes? So it's just sometimes it's really about explaining what you
language
that work that dissipates some of the opposition.
So when my listeners hear this and they want to get involved in the Rhode Island Foundation, what do? They go
to rifoundation.org. or they call me or call you and get my number. But
Okay.
the good thing about the Rhode Island Foundation is there are a million ways to help. You can volunteer, you can open a fund, you can make a contribution, you can serve on a scholarship
You
committee.
don't have to be from Rhode Island.
You don't have to be from Rhode Island. We'll take support from anywhere around the
You
country.
take checks from people not from Rhode Island?
Yes, we do, happily.
Okay. David, I was very concerned that we wouldn't have a chance to do that. I know we're out of time. Let me ask you a couple very, very quick questions. You dedicated your life to public service. People are going to hear this and they're going to hear what you said. What's your advice? How do people get involved? Why should they get involved? What should they do? What should their first step be?
I would say first, without question, I have gotten much more out of all of my service. It has been so gratifying to me, and I feel tremendously honored to have had the privilege of representing Rhode Island as an elected official and now leading the Rhode Island Foundation. I think, this is a moment where everyone has to do more of whatever it is you're comfortable doing. Volunteer for a nonprofit that you believe in, contribute if you can, support your local community foundation. But this is a moment where I think the best way we can solve some of the divisions in our country right now is for people to get involved in building relationships with people in their community that they may not know, or helping helping an organization that might serve complete strangers, but people who are in need. Like, you'll feel better. It's better for the community. If everyone does that, we'll live in a much better country.
Couldn't agree more. I have to ask you this because I ask every single politician who's ever been on, and I've asked this question for 30 years. You have not had this experience, but what is wrong with losing? What is wrong with running for office?
Oh, no, I have had the experience.
Well, you lost your first election
and it was devastating.
Was it?
It was devastating. Yeah, I mean, I was like, I will never
You
run
survived.
again. It was, I got crushed. But I will tell you, it was an important learning experience for me. It was the first time I worked really, really hard for something and I didn't get it. And I was just devastated. But it was a very humbling experience. It made me realize I had to work harder. I had to make my case. I had to recognize that sometimes it takes a moment to build something. It was, I survived it. It was hard, but it contributed to who I am today. And I would really encourage people, think about running for office. If you start off in a school committee, start off in a town council. Like, we need good people. It's hard. I know in this environment, sometimes people think, I couldn't imagine doing that, but we need good people who care about their communities, willing to run for public office.
I have two questions from listeners that I was told I have to ask, so I'll ask them very quickly. Best place to get a good meal in Rhode Island?
Oh, I could never answer that question as mayor. I can't answer it now. The good news about Providence is we have such great restaurants. I can guarantee you can wander into any place in Providence and you'll get a great meal.
I was also asked to ask you the best ice cream cone in Rhode Island. Too many.
Too many.
Too many.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry I kept you over a little bit. What a life. What a commitment to public service. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for being on Unconventional Times. David Cicilline, stay unconventional.
Thank you. My pleasure. Great to see you.
Thank you. So thank you all for listening today. I appreciate it. I think you see there's so many ways you could serve your community and your country. And as we've just all heard and seen from David Cicilline, he personifies it. And we all have an obligation to do it. So whatever you do, whatever you want to do to get involved, get involved. It's worth it. It's better for you, better for your community, better for your country. Do it. Thanks for joining us today. We're on Spotify, Apple, all the usual podcast places. You can also find us on YouTube, and our channel is YouTube at UT-Richard Gordon. YouTube at UT-Richard Gordon. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again next time. Thanks for joining Unconventional Times.
You've been listening to Unconventional Times with your host, Richard Gordon. Check out all of the episodes of Unconventional Times on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Richard Gordon and all of his unconventional conversations, head on over to unconventionaltimes.com. Thanks for listening.